program, The House Whisperer. So he's going to be exploring the past lives of buildings and the land, and exploring why it is that we're drawn to places. And we know that we all do, don't we? We go into a house and think, oh, yes, this is perfect. I want to live here forever. But he's also going to be exploring what it is that we're supposed to be doing when we're there. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Kryiacou.
Okay, are we live? Can anyone hear me? It's interesting, you can't hear yourself up here. Might not be a bad thing. Well, that piece of music, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of it, is an entire album that was downloaded to me about 20 years ago. And only realized a few weeks ago why I hadn't released it in 20 years. And it's part of a much bigger story of galactic connection. And hopefully I'll be able to share that with an audience in the near future. But that is an album that is now getting prepared for release, called Ancient Lights. So it's all about sound and vibration. Everything begins from that one point, that point of consciousness. In the beginning is the word, in the Demotic Greek, anarchai ein ho logos. So all beginning of time is now, and it's activated through vibration. And some of my earlier training from the masters was very much about going into that space of being given sacred geometry, gold ball structures. And they would be activated with mantra through sound. And they would open, explode, and activate and do the work that they needed to do, whether it be on the land or in people's houses, buildings, bigger scale work. And this was about 15 years or so ago. And so the whole energy, the whole journey that I embarked on was really one of sacred geometry in the etheric matrix, and being introduced to genetic codes of buildings, which of course relate to us as people. And so this correlation between people, the buildings, and the land are really what this work is about for me. And finding how we interact. What is it that draws us to a particular piece of land or a building? What is it in our story, our journey, that has sent out the message and attracted a particular property, a building, and so on? So that's what we're going to explore in this session. But first of all, I would love to hear your sound. So can I invite you to stand? Unless you wish to sit. And just tune right into your own center, into your heart. Just close your eyes for a moment and touch that inner space of your own peace. And take a gentle, deep breath. And as you breathe out, open your eyes and just sound whatever sound comes through you. So that sound is your sound. And through listening, all knowledge comes through that place of listening, the Akashic field. Number 5 in the circle of nine points in the Vedic system. Number 5 is Akasha. 9 is earth, 1 is absolute, or you can actually reverse them. But number 5 is the balance between the inner elements and the physical elements. So the listening, the sound, all knowledge is held in that. So the knowledge of all of you, you all just heard everybody else's story through their sound. And often when somebody calls me, you can hear straight away what the story is through their sound. But we have to be connected into our own center and listen. So this time, the same process, a nice deep breath in, but as we sound, I want you to expand and fill this room. So you're actually sounding the building. So deep breath in, expand your awareness to the building, and wonderful. Very different then, yeah? We've actually expanded out of our, whatever we believe we are. And so the sound is different. Sound will always respond, whether it's physical sound or internal subtle sound. It will respond to the space we're in. So this is giving us a clue as to how sound is affected by space. Okay, so one more time, and this time we're going to expand to take in the whole of Glastonbury. Just feel Glastonbury, that's all you have to do, just know it. If you've not been here before, just guess it. But just expand your awareness to fill the whole town. And breathe in and wonderful, thank you. Well, I don't know if you were aware, but could you feel the town actually buzzing and responding? The tour was beginning to kind of rattle, and the Abbey was definitely feeling a bit of competition there. So, always a good question. How many of us, hands up, how many of us feel at home where we live? Okay. How many do not? Okay. So that's kind of nearly half and half. 40% don't feel at home. So that's what we're going to be exploring. We'll be looking at both. So the reasons why we do not feel at home where we live. So I'll be going through several consultation examples, which is a good way of actually describing the stories. And as I mentioned, we're attracted to where we choose to live, whether it's a house, a flat, a mud hut in the woods, or under a bridge. It doesn't matter. That's what we call home. It's what we externalize, what we believe to be our values, our belief systems, our resonance, what we consider is ourselves reflected outwards. So when buildings, just a little bit of kind of architectural connection here, when an architect designs a building, that part of himself, herself, that gives birth to the concept, the conception of the building, goes into the energy matrix of that building. And that sets the tone for whatever the structure is, whether it's a home, a palace, and so on. So when we look at the dynamics of the cosmic creation, and we look at sacred geometry, we have the circle, which always represents that heaven, that wholeness, who we truly are. And then that first movement of creation into duality, creating that birth canal, that feminine bringing to birth, bringing to conception. And Christ would always be put in that. So the three energies of the universe, the mother, the father, and the son. And this is also reflected in the 3-4-5 Pythagorean triangle, if you want to go into the mathematics of it. So these three energies are always present in the universe. So that first movement of unity to duality, and all we're trying to ever do with any of this work, through sacred geometry, sacred sound, literature, music, whatever, is through the process actually come back to who we truly are. And in fact, we never actually leave who we truly are. We just believe we've moved from it. And that's what we do. We go into the world of illusion, delusion, duality, and so on. And so the purpose, as far as I'm concerned, with a sacred building is to remind us of who we truly are. And actually, in every part of its location on the land, on the energy lines, in its sacred geometry, in its whole concept, when you walk into it, and this can be our homes as well, of course, when we walk into that space, it actually reminds us of who we truly are. Then we can truly feel at home. Anything else is just a great disturbance. So, merging heaven on earth, again, the symbolism of the circle squared. Heaven, earth, the masculine, feminine, the distance around the circle and the square are equal. So that's the symbolism, that's the message. And just over the road, next door, we've got the Abbot's Kitchen, which is a perfect exposition of this geometry. Also, it's based on the golden mean geometry as well. And the sound in there, if you've not been in there, the acoustics are extraordinary. We've done many sessions in there and recordings. And the monks are still alive and kick in, and they love joining in. If you go in there and start sounding, they will join you. And I have recordings that there are voices that have joined in, and you can hear them on the recording, that are definitely not physically present. So it's quite a good space to work in. So the whole point of creating any structure as an architect is how it can hold the cosmic energy charge. And we talk in feng shui about not having the front door in line with the back door. That's like, okay, but this is about the energy escaping from the building. And there are many ways of actually holding the energy into a building. But first of all, it has to be located in the right place. And often a lot of buildings are so in the wrong place, should never have been built there in the first place, or they're on geopathic lines or grids. And this creates a problem in itself. But ultimately, if a building is actually placed on the correct spot to begin with, you're actually taking in the maximum cosmic earth energy charge. And then what do we do with it? If we then create a building through sacred geometry, and we actually put the heart and soul in the building, then you're actually charging up that building so that it can hold the charge. And when we look at any of these sacred buildings, their geometry is such that it is holding the cosmic energy in, and it's a charge capacitor. Because without charge, we have no energy. So if we are in these buildings, it will hold our energy charge to its highest. So many reasons where the energetic problems are created. We have, the bioresonance, the morphic field, and so on, the consciousness grids of the Earth, and of course, galactic forces that are hitting the Earth and sites. And I've often been to sites or people's homes for a consultation where things just aren't going right. And you can just see a shaft of energy. I've always called it the shard of energy. And interestingly, we've got one right in the heart of London at the moment. So, and when that energy hits the Earth, it's like you just don't build there. That should be left for something else. And respecting the elementals, of course. You give them their space, and then they give us our space to build. But we don't do that. We just take every space to build, and that creates problems. So people, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, all that is an overlay on top of all this. So we've done some sounding, and remember that center code. Everything is held. In Sanskrit, it's the spota, the seed point that holds the whole genetic code of any structure, of any thing we want to bring into creation. It's held at the point which holds the geometric sound that when you activate it, it explodes and we bring into creation whatever it is we want to construct, create, and so on. So how do we, moving on into the more geometric detail of what maximizes the code and the energy of the energy charge of a building is its fractality. The human heart is the golden mean vibration. It can be measured to vibrate to that ratio. So when we are in love, it's the golden mean ratio that works. And if a building is, again, designed to that, then it's got the highest chance of actually dispelling any, let's call them negative earth energies or psychic energies that are around. Because when we create a web of energy that is impacted by the earth energies, our emotions, beliefs, other world stuff, psychic stuff, what's left behind from previous residents and so on, all this gets locked into this spider web of energy and gets munched up. And if people talk about space clearing, it's not a correct word because you don't go in and clear. If you do, you wipe away the opportunity of learning why we're living where we live. But it's about, for me, realigning that geometric space. And the ultimate geometry that we can put into a space is actually already there in the etheric potential, in the Akashic field, is the golden mean vibration. And so if we can create that golden mean aura in a building, in our home, nothing negative can actually get stuck in it. It's got a free flow through. So that's always the end result when I'm working with people, is that the space is clear, realigned of all the energies that are destructive in the earth, in the people, in the previous people living there, in the bricks and mortar that hold memory and so on. And then you charge up the building to its highest potential. And then that leaves you in your home to actually get on with your journey to its highest. But what that process will do is actually illuminate what your story is. And then it's up to you to take the reins and move with that. Because that's what realigning space at this level does. It will totally and utterly illuminate where we are in our personal journey in relation to the building that we've chosen or the building has chosen us. It's the same thing. We've come together for that purpose. So energy codes we see all over the place. Over here we've got the Feng Shui Bagua, which is the magic square of 15. And here in Barcelona, Gaudi's put a very interesting one, which is a magic square of 33. So those interested in magic squares, again, this is all part of the coding of space and building. And remember, like a crop circle is not a flat structure. It is a three-dimensional structure above and below the Earth. And some of them actually look three-dimensional, but even the ones that are totally and utterly flat do have a three-dimensional spherical aura around them. And I'm sure some of you can see that. I certainly can in energetic situations, and of course, going to houses. This is something I measured while I was on holiday years and years ago in Greece. And again, these buildings actually hold the charge. They hold the code, the geometry. The root 3 geometry, which comes from the hexagram and so on, is quite a sacred proportion, like the golden mean. And the root 3 is, for example, the King's College Chapel in Cambridge was built to the root 3 geometry. So the golden mean ratio we see in nature, in the peacock is a beautiful example, the sunflower, and we can use these images as power chargers in our homes and spaces. The golden mean, as I'm sure many of you will know, is the only geometry that has no stress at the node points. It can expand and contract without crunching up. This is why it's so powerful. This is a church in Venice, beautiful mosaic floor to the golden mean. And again, the Epidavros in Greece. These places were used for healing. This is actually part of a healing center. And there is a golden mean temple here as well. Chartres, of course, we can't bypass talking about Chartres Cathedral. Doorways, portals, whenever we go through a doorway, that is actually encoded with the harmonics of creation. And those of you who know it or have been there, you feel that when you go through. The golden mean is part of that, the pentagram. And so as we go through a doorway, our DNA coding is completely, and I think I'm going to lose, of course, because we haven't got power. We've lost the charge. Oh, wonderful. There we go. So. Don't you just love it? We might be able to catch it before it switches out. The code of Windows. So, we'll have to just reboot, so we'll give it a second. We powered up there, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so while that's just coming back on, we're talking about Chartres Cathedral and the doorways, and the number 9 is very much a Templar number, and a very powerful one. And might just kick back in. And those of you who've been to Chartres, right at the back at the east end, we've got the Templar Towers, and the steps going up to that have got 9 windows and so on. So it's a very powerful energetic interruptions. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully we're back on track. So if you have vertigo, you might want to avert your eyes on this one, but Actually, I did have a wonderful shot, but I didn't manage to get it in, of a pigeon at the top of the cathedral about to jump. And he does, but... So there's a little journey over the roof. So they're the 9 windows going to the Templar Towers over to the right there. So we knew what we were doing in those days. It's all about creating charge, connecting it to galactic portals, and so on. And in the construction of these buildings, it's very much about the architect holding the consciousness and the vision and the energetic geometry of the building and just standing there while it's been built around them. And you hear reports in a lot of historical texts about the master architect walking around with a staff and just standing, doing nothing, which is exactly what we need to do. So, holding the consciousness matrix. And so many buildings, the Alhambra, I know I have a past life connection with this and the waterways, and there are extraordinary channels of water that are all about charging the chi, charging the building. So it's all to do with energy. And when we look at languaging and coding, again, this is all about the script holding the vibration. Whatever the language is, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Arabic, they all hold a vibration. And that can be translated into, as we heard yesterday, into number, through gematria and so on, and into architecture. So let's go to our first building and see how all this affects people's lives. So here we have a building which the clients had a lot of problems with. It's a commercial building. And when I tuned into this to see what was going on, because there was something not good, very dark in the basement, it became very clear that somebody had left in the 4 corners of the foundations some kind of program running. And it's quite common to actually plant in the corners of foundations. And it's actually part of a process of building and honoring the land and so on to actually do that. And so this actually encodes the spirit of the building and its purpose as to why the building is there and what its function is. Now, of course, it doesn't help when people leave the building and leave those codes running. Then somebody comes along and wants to make a change of use of the building. But you've got the old program running. And that, of course, is going to create a problem. And when we talk about in planning getting a change of use for a building or commercial or home, whatever, nobody ever considers to ask the land, the spirit of the land, the building, the soul of the building, do they want to be changed? We just put a planning application in. And what I've discovered over years and years of working with this as an architect, but as well as bringing that into this aspect of the energy work, is if the land or the spirit of the house does not want to be changed, you're going to get a planning refusal. And we get all up in arms about the planners didn't do this and that and they refuse. But it's actually the message from the land or the soul of the building saying, this isn't right. It's not what we want. So you've really got to listen and speak with the building and find out what's needed. And so when something like this office building was, the programs left running, it created a lot of problems. So, and to actually, and I say many years ago when I was given some, my early instructions in the early 90s, I was shown very clearly how to actually break the codes, or how to actually create codes in the etheric matrix structures. But of course, in the process of creating them, I was being taught how to actually de-encode them. But to actually break a code of a structure or a program that's running in a building or land that somebody has planted deliberately or encoded for a purpose, you have to actually go in at the same level of the person who encoded it to actually decode it. So it's a kind of geometrical, mathematical, energetic process. It's not something I can easily kind of share with people, but it's something I was shown how to do, and I use it all the time in this work. And so deprogramming this then completely lifted the feeling of the building. So no amount of space clearing or feng shui or any other thing would make any difference to something like this, because you've got to hit the core, which is the coding that's running the building. So, okay, now this is an interesting story with several stories within it. And this is out in Oxford. And here's the house down here. And this is the edge of a village. And as we drove up towards the house, saw the house, all I could hear was the house saying to me, "We shouldn't have been built here. Shouldn't have been built here." Now, when I hear that, it means we shouldn't have been built here. There's no compromise. And I've got to keep these stories as short as possible, so I've got about a dozen of them to share with you. But essentially, the energy, it was the edge of the village, and there was another building there that I could see psychically. And the core energy that was created there, the earth vortex and so on, was creating horrendous problems within the household. And so that had to be dealt with. But what was extraordinary was the wife who owned the house, they were drawn to the area and just happened to see this house in an agent's window, had no connection to the area, no desire to live there, but something drew them. And after about 8 hours of the consultation, this lady realized, or the spirit of what was actually locked in, that she was carrying a dual energy, a dual spirit. It was actually quite a dark energy she was carrying. And that began to release from her as part of the process. So call it exorcism or whatever, but it's that's a bit of a heavy word, but it was actually separating what is not yours from what truly is you. And when you've got that kind of energy you're carrying, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. And so as this energy lifted, it became very clear afterwards that it was that energetic person who actually chose that house because there was a link to people who'd lived there before the house was built. So you see, it's quite a convoluted story as to how they actually ended up moving there. So it wasn't them who chose the house. It was that dark energy she was carrying that wanted to move back there. It's quite extraordinary. Often I find the answers do not lie in this lifetime, in our lifetime, and you often have to go back to previous lifetimes to get the whole story, because our whole story isn't just our years here. It goes much, much further back. So, and the other interesting thing was, you can see this fence line here. This was the edge of the village, and you could still feel the boundary, even though they'd taken the fence away and the garden was there. And what we do when we create a kind of conscious, that's the edge of my boundary, you create a psychic wall, which you can, with dowsing rods, go through it and they'll cross to tell you it's there, or you can just see it or feel it. And this was still there. So the consciousness of the village people, the village consciousness, still had its boundary running through the front bit of their garden. So that was causing other problems as well. So Okay, over to Italy. You can see I've clearly, I'm not mentioning names or places or people and so on for confidentiality, but people are happy for me to use the examples. Now, this is quite an extraordinary one because the problem here was at about 6 o'clock every evening, the couple who own this house would suddenly start smelling roast lamb cooking. And so they'd kind of go upstairs to where the old kitchen was, over on the right there. Of course, there's nobody there. And this just went on and on. Same time, every day. 6 o'clock in the evening, really strong smell of roast lamb. And of course, there was a family who was still in residence in spirit. But they were live and active, so they were going out during the day, because about 8, 9 in the morning, we actually stayed in the house for a few days, just outside the house. They weren't there. They've gone off to work. And then 5 or 6 o'clock, they come home, and you start smelling the cooking, because, of course, that's what they did, and they're still doing it. So, of course, there's a major part of the story there that they're actually living with another family in spirit. And if you're happy with that, that's okay. But I never feel there's any validity in holding anybody in spirit if you can help them to release. But I find it's absolutely crucial to find out why they're there. What is their story? Because again, if you go in, and I hate this word, ghostbusting, because that actually just destroys. It actually fragments the soul of those people in spirit. So one has to be really careful and sensitive with how you deal with the energies. Now we're talking about people who have lived and have passed over and are stuck. Very different to entity energy, which is another level of consciousness to be dealt with in a different way. So when we've got people in spirit, and if you can help them release, what I find is the most powerful process is to make sure that you know what their story is. Because they're making a noise often, they're banging, because they want attention, they want help. And so I'm sure this is not new to a lot of you, this concept, but in relation to how it affects us in houses, or a house like this that doesn't sell and so on, it makes a huge difference. And also, do we have a responsibility to those people in spirit? Yes, of course we do. They're our ancestors at one level, our family, soul family. And so another part of that story was actually quite an interesting one, and it will be up on YouTube soon, so you can watch the whole episode, was the relationship between the two girls, young girls who were part of this family, and the grandfather and grandmother who were looking after them. So that's another part of the story which gets more and more intriguing. So, so no images on this one at the moment, but 3 very quick things just on the same kind of concept. Sleepy Hollow, you've all heard of Sleepy Hollow up in New York. First Dutch settlement in 1665. You seen the film, Sleepy Hollow? If you haven't, it's great fun. Headless Horseman rises out of the graveyard of the church, which is actually there, and goes around kind of chopping people's heads off and stuff like that, looking for his own head. So there's quite lots of levels to that in relation to what we're talking about. But anyway, I was asked to do a consultation on a house there. So this kind of energy is definitely being carried in this town. And the house felt incredibly dark. And when I went to the top of the stairs to go, because there was definitely a core of energy up in the bedroom, And as I got to the top of the stairs, I was physically spun round and thrown down the stairs. It was that physical. Managed to grab hold of the banister rail to stop myself going down. But that's how powerful these energies can get, especially when they don't want you to clear them or move them on. So that kind of darker demonic side needs, as I say, a different way of dealing with it. But the one in Athens is a fascinating one because, again, this is very much about human kind of psychic creation. And the lady phoned me, this was many years ago in the late 90s, and she said, you get some strange calls sometimes, all I want to do, Christian, is drown myself in my swimming pool. Okay. And what was happening was the husband had gone off with a younger woman who was practicing black magic, and they were trying to get the wife to drown herself so they could take the property, which was a very expensive part of Athens. So that was the agenda. And that was my early days of creating energy shields to actually protect psychic attack coming in to her because she was being programmed to actually kill herself. Great. And so created this, one of my Mark I energetic shields, nicely programmed, thought really proud of that. Within a week, she phoned me and said, it's all happening again. And when I tuned into the structure, I could see it had been torn. Like imagine a metal grid, a golden grid. And somebody had and so the woman who was the lady doing the black magic stuff had actually started tearing apart the structure, and they got in. So I thought, okay. So I was then instructed next level of coding, and that's where it then started going into different dimensional coding and programs using rhythms, harmonics, different materials, different geometries, and so on. And so you have to, and pulsing. Pulsing is a very powerful part of programming shields. And so once you create this code, it needs someone of the same frequency to actually break into it. So, and that's kind of gone on to hundreds of levels up since those days. But this actually dealt with the problem. They couldn't get into the house. And then, of course, a few months later, I get called again. It's all happening again. And I thought, this is not possible. The structure's still in place. It's very strong. And you know what she did? I said, I can't. I did ask the obvious question, of course. It's like, I don't understand how he's getting in, and attacking you. And she admitted that she was letting him in through the front door. I thought, look, I'm doing all this high-level energy work, and you're opening the front door to him. Well, I love him, and I want him back. And it's like, well, that's okay. So I said, well, you've got to take responsibility here, otherwise I can't keep coming, even though I love going back to Greece, and being paid for it. It's great. But so that was good. The other really dark one in Greece was the priest dog story. And, oh, by the way, all these stories are going into the House Whisperers 108 Stories, which I'm co-writing with Sandy, who's sitting here. We've done a lot of this work together. And they are, in fact, this weekend, I'm touching my 900th consultation of this kind, so it's quite a milestone for me. So the Greek priest went to this house, and it was so dark, and they had ancestral paintings of their ancestors, really dark oil paintings back in the 18th, 17th century, and they held so much darkness and entity energy. They got a priest in to do the do. And of course, this made it worse because they go in fighting evil, Sword of Michael and all that stuff. Nothing wrong with that. But if you go in knowing that you're fighting duality, you're in a battle. I don't believe that's the way to do it. And so the effect this had was to actually threw the dog off the first floor balcony and killed itself. And I strongly believed it was the daughter that was meant to be thrown off, but the dog took that responsibility, that energy for her, which is what animals do for us. And so you've got to be really careful how you work this energy. I believe, and how I work with this, is about knowing that we are one. I'm not going in to fight something dark and negative. Even when we're looking at geopathic lines in the earth, it's not about, we've got a bad line, we've got to get rid of it, or we've got to stake it, or whatever. And I don't apologize to dowsers for that. It's not how I do it. To me, if I can stand on the line and actually know I am aham, and connect to the earth, connect to that energy grid, then all falls into alignment. And then there is no duality. There is no negative line. It's a disparity of the house and the line, the energy of the people that are out of alignment that creates the energetic fragmentation in our fields. So if we can bring all those into line through the harmonics of the heart, then everything is... And that's where I get to at an end of a session in a consultation with people. In fact, I don't leave a place until that heart harmonic is reached. So the land, the building, the original soul of the spirit of the building, the people, the family, have all reached that same harmonic, and they can feel at home. So, over in Jordan, where I was a few months ago, and I was asked to teach a group of 15 architects 3 days of everything I'm speaking to you about today and a lot more. And I was quite excited because I tried this teaching architects about 15 years or so ago and didn't get much interest. And in fact now, I've been clearly asked to actually work with university students, architectural students, because trying to work at the architect's level is not the easiest. But had a group of 15 architects here, and we had the most extraordinary time. So, see, we've got them in the park here, all out with their dowsing rods, and so they're very keen to continue working with this, which is incredible. And there's one person there who has a practice with 85 architects in the office, and went to work in those offices as well, and had all those staff, or a dozen or so, the key people, working at this energetic level and dowsing over the drawings, and then they would go and check the spaces in the offices. And we work from this concept of you are one, we are one, the building is one. So if you can connect to that, now go back and tell me if that negative line is in your office. And they couldn't find it. Because that line, the duality, the illusion of that negativity, disappeared. It's only as real as we believe it to be so, or that somebody else before you has left it so, and we walk into it. We're attracted to it by resonance, whatever the story is. So another extraordinary story is, we see this all the time, people carving the earth, dishonoring Mother Earth. And this story was a block of flats I worked with, the whole family lives there, and their father had actually built this plot without honoring the earth, the foundations, and that my 5 minute? 10. Okay. And we always used to do this, honouring the earth, doing process, ceremony. And this wasn't done. And this man's work was a land mover. He would cut mountains, like this one. That's his job. And of course, his entire family were dying of cancer. You did the readings going through this whole building up on the right where they lived. And it was like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. And anything over 5 or 6 is cancer forming. So they were dying, the whole block. That's how bad it was. But when you upset Mother Earth, it will do this. It's way beyond physical geopathic lines. Geopathic lines are consciousness lines. They're us. We are the geopathic lines. Yeah? It's not something out there or under there or up there. We're part of it. We co-create consciously these energies. So I sat with him because they were going on about their disaster, and I just said, sit. And I just close your eyes and go into the space. And what I got immediately was Kuan Yin come in. The most extraordinary, beautiful energy. And I'd previously, for the last few weeks before that, I'd been doing some work, ceremony on that. And she came in, the whole Mother Earth thing was so powerful. Then when he came out of the meditations, I said, well, so what happened? And he just said, I just saw the most extraordinary woman in pure light, and she was dressed in blue and white. Of course, we're in Jordan, and there's that Mother Earth, Mary energy. Absolutely, totally sacred. It totally blew him away. And I got him to actually honor the land and make amends, apologies for himself, because that's what he does, carves up mountains, and for his father, who did the same with that block. And part of the story I didn't tell you was the problem I was called in, apart from the health issues, is that the government had frozen all his business assets, totally. And this is what happens when you don't kind of honor and respect the land or a building. It will kick back in some way. This way, it was through the government saying, freeze, your whole life's on hold. So he comes out of the meditations, sees Mother Mary in this bright light, does the apology process, and then we go through the flat with the dowsing rods, and they're holding the dowsing rods, always given to the client so they can do the read, and they could find nothing. It had dropped down to 0 or 1 out of 10. Completely shifted. That's how powerful a process like that is, honoring that Mother Earth energy, absolute core. And then we went to this site, which is frozen, all the works were stopped. And you can see where it was cut. And he did the same ceremony there. Lunchtime the next day, I get a phone call saying, I was called into a meeting by the government officers, and I don't know if this is a coincidence, but they've agreed to unfreeze my assets. So the whole thing was released. You see how quickly and powerful, if you hit something at the core of what really matters, right back to that seed point, the spota we spoke of, that which holds the code. There's no point dusting the surface of something. You've got to get right back to the core. What is the story? What did the damage? So quite extraordinary. 5 minutes. Thank you. So, okay. Okay. Houses won't sell. This is a house in Chelsea, would not rent for months. Beautiful place. And again, this is all on the same kind of process that the building did not want to be relet because it was abused by the previous owners. They were apparently doing some really nasty things. So I got her to actually connect with the soul of the building, and it's often located physically in a space. It's not always the kitchen people think is the heart of the home. You've got to find where the core soul is. We found it, got her to connect with it, do the apologies and promise not to let it to anyone who would abuse it. Within 1 hour, 2 agents from the same estate agent office phoned up and said, we've got 2 people to bring around that afternoon, and she let it. That's how quick. In another one in Chelsea I did many years ago, we did the work, she spent 3 million renovating it. 6 months empty. Nobody would rent it or buy it. And we did the work, same sort of thing, on the way over to her Kensington flat. And on the way over, she gets a call from the agent saying, you know, there's people who saw it 6 months ago. Yeah, they want it now. I mean, that's within 1 hour of hitting the process. That's how fast it can be. Okay, sometimes properties take longer to sell, but that's because the owners need to process more of the stuff. But if you've actually processed it, there is nothing holding a building from selling. It's quite extraordinary. So many examples of that. This is another one not far from here. Similar thing, but the energy of the earth was, the elementals was disrespected. And so what can often happen is that they will actually steel ring fence around your property, and it will keep it in a time zone. And when you extend a building, and this had about half a dozen different, right back from medieval times up to the present time, and nobody considers, did anyone ask the building if they wanted to put an extension on me? I prefer to call it an integration. But if it's not integrated, it will be an extension out of time to the original soul of the building. And so it's like a building saying, well, what have you stuck on my shoulder, on my back? It's like, you can't expect a building to be happy with that. And so all I could see was like this, like on, you're watching a theatre and all these different rooms and all these different plays going on in different time dimensions, and all the spirits and everything locked in because the elementals weren't being honoured. So again, releasing that, and I believe that's sold in about within the month. So lots of stories like that. I don't know if I can get through this one. This is Canada, most extraordinary. 2 stories going on here, and I go straight into them. I spent a week living on the land with them, and essentially everything was going wrong, and my 2 llama friends on the right, very hilarious. So there we've got the sacrificial stone, and it really felt like it. So I'll go straight to the core details. She was actually beheaded there in a previous lifetime, and she had to come back and take her power back. She always walked around the land in slippers, moccasins. She lived there before. So we did ceremony, she connected to it, and she saw it, she knew it. And this is actually on the House Whisperer TV video webpage, the TV channel, so you can watch that episode. So that was one part of the story. The other part was a village that was massacred, and her father, there was a spirit at the gateway, and he used to jump in the back of the car as I drove a mile down where I was living on the land every night. Very, very strange feeling. And he was at the gateway saying, I've not been honoured, my village has not been honoured. And as I looked down here, I could see the massacre still happening, and thousands of souls needed to be released, and they were. But only when she actually connected to this guardian spirit, and she realized, you can see it was filmed live, and you can see her connecting to the spirit who turns out to be her father. And as soon as she connected with that, everything was like released, and all the souls of the village that were killed and massacred were able to be released. So I think that's it. So I hope that's given you a sense of what goes on and how important it is to honor and respect the land and the connection with homes and our story as to why we're there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Christian Kryiacou.